Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. The air nipped at Brandon's cheeks as he stepped out of Helen's car, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The weight of the long, flowing skirt felt foreign against his legs, and he found himself constantly adjusting the wig that now adorned his head. Helen had gone to great lengths to ensure his transformation into Brenda was complete. And as they approached the first house on their caroling route, Brandon couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. Remember, just relax and let your voice shine, Helen whispered, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. You've got this. Brandon nodded, taking a deep breath as Helen rang the doorbell. The sound of footsteps approaching from inside made his stomach churn, but as the door swung open, revealing a smiling elderly couple, he felt a sudden calm wash over him. Good evening, Helen chirped, her voice filled with holiday cheer. We're here to spread some Christmas joy through song. Would you like to hear a carol? The couple's eyes lit up, and they nodded enthusiastically. Helen turned to the group, giving a subtle nod to Brandon. As the first notes of Silent Night filled the air, Brandon closed his eyes, allowing the music to flow through him. His voice, usually hidden away for fear of ridicule, now soared above the others, clear and pure as a bell. When the song ended, Brandon opened his eyes to find the elderly couple wiping away tears. That was absolutely beautiful, the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. Especially you, dear, she added, looking directly at Brandon. Your voice is truly angelic. A warmth spread through Brandon's chest, and for the first time in years, he felt proud of his voice. As they moved on to the next house, Helen beamed at him. I told you, didn't I? You're amazing, Brenda. The night continued in much the same way, with Brandon's confidence growing with each performance. By the time they reached their final stop, he was no longer nervous about being recognized. Instead, he reveled in the praise and admiration his voice garnered. As they walked back to Helen's car, she turned to Brandon with a mischievous glint in her eye. So, Brenda, how would you feel about extending this little adventure for a few more days? Brandon hesitated for a moment, but the memory of the night's success and the feeling of freedom that came with being Brenda quickly won out. I'd love to, he said, surprised by his own eagerness. The next morning, Brandon found himself once again transformed into Brenda, this time for a day of shopping with Helen. As they browsed through racks of clothing, Helen occasionally held up items for Brandon to try on. Oh, this would look stunning on you, she exclaimed, holding up an emerald green sweater dress. Why don't you try it on? Brandon hesitated for a moment before taking the dress and heading to the fitting room. As he slipped it on, he couldn't help but marvel at how the soft fabric hugged his curves he didn't even know he had until now. When he stepped out to show Helen, her eyes widened. Brenda, you look absolutely gorgeous, she breathed. You have to get it. As they continued shopping, Brandon found himself enjoying the experience more than he ever had before. He tried on skirts, blouses, and even a pair of heels, each item making him feel more comfortable in his new skin. By the time they returned to Helen's house that evening, Brandon's arms were laden with bags filled with his new wardrobe. As he set them down in the guest room, Helen appeared in the doorway. I hope you don't mind, but I've invited a few friends over for dinner, she said. I thought it might be nice for Brenda to meet some new people. Brandon felt a flicker of panic, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of excitement. That sounds lovely, he heard himself say. As Helen's friends arrived, Brandon found himself slipping easily into the role of Brenda. He laughed at their jokes, shared stories about his supposed life, and even flirted a little with one of the men, something he never would have dreamed of doing as Brandon. As the night wore on, Brandon excused himself to use the bathroom. As he stared at his reflection in the mirror, he was struck by how natural he looked as Brenda. The makeup Helen had applied earlier still looked perfect, and his wig framed his face in a way that softened his features. For the first time in his life, he felt truly beautiful. When he returned to the party, Helen pulled him aside. "You're doing wonderfully," she whispered. "Everyone loves you." Brandon felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. As the last of the guests left, he helped Helen clean up, feeling more comfortable in her home than he ever had in his own apartment. "You know," Helen said as they finished putting away the last of the dishes, "I've been thinking, how would you feel about continuing this arrangement?" Brandon looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Helen took a deep breath. "Well, I've been looking for a personal assistant for a while now, and you've proven to be incredibly capable. I was wondering if you'd be interested in taking on the role as Brenda." Brandon felt his heart skip a beat. The idea was terrifying, but at the same time oddly appealing. I don't know," he stammered. "What about my job? My life as Brandon?" Helen smiled reassuringly. "We can work all that out. The important thing is, do you want this? Do you want to be Brenda?" Brandon closed his eyes, thinking about how he'd felt over the past few days. The confidence, the freedom, the joy he'd experienced as Brenda was unlike anything he'd ever known. Slowly, he nodded. "Yes," he whispered. "I think I do." Over the next few weeks, Brandon's life underwent a dramatic transformation. With Helen's help, he gradually transitioned into living full-time as Brenda. They came up with a cover story for his absence from his old job, and Helen helped him navigate the complexities of his new identity. At first, Brandon was terrified of being discovered. Every time he stepped outside, he was sure someone would recognize him. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, he began to relax. The more he lived as Brenda, the more natural it felt. Helen proved to be an incredible mentor and friend throughout the process. She helped Brandon perfect his feminine mannerisms, taught him about makeup and fashion, and was always there to offer support when he felt overwhelmed. One evening, as they sat in Helen's living room going over the schedule for the upcoming week, Brandon found himself overcome with emotion. "Helen," he said, his voice thick with tears, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me." Helen reached out and took his hand. "Oh, sweetie, you don't need to thank me. Seeing you blossom into the person you were always meant to be is thanks enough." Brandon smiled through his tears. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he admitted. "For so long, I felt like I was living a lie, hiding who I really was. But now, as Brenda, I finally feel like myself." Helen squeezed his hand. "You know, there's a term for what you're experiencing. It's called being transgender. Have you ever considered that this might be more than just enjoying dressing up?" Brandon felt a jolt of recognition at her words. He'd heard the term before, of course, but had never applied it to himself. But now, sitting here as Brenda, it suddenly made perfect sense. I think you might be right," he whispered. Over the next few months, Brandon, now fully embracing her identity as Brenda, began to explore what it meant to be transgender. With Helen's support, she started seeing a therapist who specialized in gender identity issues. She learned about hormone therapy and other medical options available to her. As Brenda became more comfortable in her identity, she also became more confident in her role as Helen's assistant. She excelled at organizing Helen's schedule, managing her correspondence, and even representing her at business meetings. One day, as they were preparing for an important client dinner, Helen turned to Brenda with a smile. "You know, I have a confession to make," she said. Brenda looked at her curiously. "What's that?" Helen took a deep breath. "When I first asked you to join the caroling group, it wasn't just because of your voice. I had a feeling about you. I sensed that there was more to you than met the eye, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to explore that." Brenda felt a rush of emotions, surprise, gratitude, and a deep affection for the woman who had changed her life so completely. "You knew?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Helen nodded. "I had a hunch. I've known other transgender individuals before, and there was something about you that reminded me of them. I hope you're not upset that I didn't tell you sooner." Brenda shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. How could I be upset? You've given me the greatest gift anyone could ever give, the chance to be my true self. As they embraced, Brenda felt a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in her life, everything felt right. She was Brenda now in every way that mattered, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as her authentic self. The client dinner that evening was a resounding success. Brenda charmed everyone with her wit and grace, and Helen beamed with pride as she watched her protégé in action. As they were saying goodbye to the last of the guests, Helen pulled Brenda aside. You were absolutely fantastic tonight, she said, her eyes shining. I don't know what I'd do without you. Brenda felt a warmth spread through her chest at Helen's words. I'm just glad I can repay you for everything you've done for me, she said softly. Helen shook her head. You don't owe me anything, Brenda. I'm just happy I could help you become who you were always meant to be. As they cleaned up from the dinner, Brenda found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in such a short time. Just a few months ago, she had been living as Brandon, miserable and afraid to be herself. Now she was confident, happy, and finally at peace with who she was. The next morning, as Brenda was going through Helen's emails, she came across one that made her heart skip a beat. It was from a transgender support group in the city, inviting Helen to speak at their next meeting about being an ally to the trans community. Brenda hesitated for a moment before bringing it to Helen's attention. Helen, she said, her voice slightly shaky, I found this email. I think maybe we should go. Helen looked up from her work, surprise evident on her face. Are you sure? You don't have to if you're not ready. Brenda took a deep breath. I'm sure. I think it's time for me to meet others like me, to really embrace this part of myself. Helen's face broke into a wide smile. I'm so proud of you, Brenda. Of course we'll go. The night of the support group meeting arrived, and Brenda found herself nervous in a way she hadn't been since her first night caroling as Brenda. As they walked into the community center where the meeting was being held, she gripped Helen's hand tightly. The room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, all united by their shared experiences as transgender individuals or allies. As Helen took the stage to speak, Brenda felt a sense of awe wash over her. Here was the woman who had changed her life so completely, now helping others understand and support people like her. After Helen's speech, there was time for mingling. Brenda found herself drawn into conversations with others who shared similar stories. For the first time, she felt truly understood, truly part of a community. As they were leaving, a young trans woman approached Brenda. Your story is so inspiring, she said. I hope one day I can be as confident and happy as you are. Brenda felt tears prick at her eyes. You will be, she said, pulling the young woman into a hug. Just be true to yourself. As they drove home that night, Brenda turned to Helen. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Helen reached over and squeezed her hand. You're welcome, Brenda. But remember, you're the one who had the courage to become who you truly are. I'm just glad I could help you along the way. Brenda smiled, feeling a sense of peace and contentment she had never known before. She was Brenda now, in every way that mattered, and she knew that whatever the future held, she would face it as her true self, with Helen by her side. One crisp autumn morning, as Brenda was organizing Helen's schedule for the upcoming week, she noticed an interesting invitation. A prestigious women's business conference was requesting Helen as a keynote speaker, with a focus on diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Brenda's heart raced as she read the details, an idea forming in her mind. Helen, she called out, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. I think you should accept this speaking engagement, but I was wondering if maybe we could propose something a little different. Helen looked up from her desk, intrigued. What did you have in mind? Brenda took a deep breath. What if we both spoke? You could talk about being an ally and supporting diversity, and I could share my experiences as a transgender woman in the business world." A slow smile spread across Helen's face. "Brenda, that's a brilliant idea. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of public exposure?" Nodding firmly, Brenda replied, "I think it's time. If my story can help even one person feel more accepted or inspired to be themselves, it'll be worth it." The conference organizers were thrilled with the proposal, and over the next few weeks, Brenda threw herself into preparing for her first major public speaking engagement. She worked tirelessly on her speech, practicing in front of Helen and even joining a local Toastmasters group to hone her skills. The day of the conference arrived, and Brenda found herself standing backstage, nervously smoothing down her carefully chosen outfit, a tailored navy blue pantsuit that made her feel powerful and professional. Helen appeared beside her, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You've got this, Brenda," she whispered. "Just remember, your story is powerful. Your truth is going to touch so many lives today." As they were introduced and walked out onto the stage, Brenda felt a surge of confidence. Looking out at the sea of faces, women from all walks of life, all there to learn and grow, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Helen began the presentation, speaking eloquently about the importance of fostering inclusive workplaces and the role of allies in supporting marginalized communities. Then, with a warm smile, she introduced Brenda. Taking a deep breath, Brenda stepped up to the microphone.
"Good morning, everyone. My name is Brenda, and I'm a transgender woman." Her voice, once a source of shame, now rang out clear and strong. 3 years ago, I was living as Brandon, trapped in a life that didn't feel like my own. Today, I stand before you as my true self, and I'd like to share my journey with you."
As Brenda recounted her story, from the night of caroling to her transformation and the challenges she faced in the business world, she could see the impact her words were having. Some audience members wiped away tears, while others nodded in understanding or recognition.
"My journey hasn't always been easy," Brenda concluded, "but it's been infinitely rewarding. I hope that by sharing my story, I can encourage all of you to embrace your authentic selves and to create workplaces where everyone feels valued and accepted for who they truly are."
The applause that followed was deafening. As Brenda and Helen left the stage, they were immediately surrounded by conference attendees eager to express their gratitude and share their own stories. One woman, her eyes brimming with tears, approached Brenda. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "My daughter just came out as transgender, and I've been so worried about her future. Seeing you up there, successful and confident, it gives me hope." Brenda hugged the woman tightly, feeling a profound sense of purpose wash over her. This was why she had chosen to speak out, to make a difference in the lives of others like her. In the weeks that followed, Brenda found herself inundated with speaking requests and invitations to join diversity and inclusion initiatives at various companies. She and Helen carefully considered each opportunity, choosing those that would have the most significant impact. As Brenda's public profile grew, so did her confidence. She began to see herself not just as Helen's assistant, but as a powerful advocate for transgender rights and workplace inclusivity. Helen, ever supportive, encouraged Brenda to take on more responsibilities and to consider branching out on her own. "You've come so far, Brenda," Helen said one evening as they shared a quiet dinner. "I think it's time for you to spread your wings even further. Have you ever thought about starting your own consulting firm? Focusing on helping companies become more inclusive and supportive of transgender employees?" Brenda's eyes widened at the suggestion. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. "Do you really think I could do that?" Helen reached across the table, clasping Brenda's hand in hers.
"I know you can. You've got the experience, the passion, and the story to make a real difference, and you know I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Tears welled up in Brenda's eyes as she contemplated the possibility. From a scared, closeted individual to a confident businesswoman and advocate, it seemed almost too good to be true. But looking into Helen's eyes, seeing the unwavering belief there,
Brenda knew it was possible. Over the next few months, Brenda worked tirelessly to establish her own consulting firm, focusing on trans inclusivity in the workplace. She drew on her personal experiences, her business acumen honed under Helen's tutelage, and her growing network within the transgender community to create a unique and impactful approach. The day she officially launched her firm, Brenda stood in her new office, looking out over the city skyline. She thought back to that chilly December night when she first stepped out of Helen's car as Brenda, terrified but exhilarated. How far she had come since then. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Helen, holding a beautifully wrapped package. "I thought your new office could use a little something," she said, handing the gift to Brenda. Carefully unwrapping it, Brenda gasped. It was a framed photo of the two of them from that first night of caroling, Brenda's face alight with joy as she sang. "To remind you of where this journey began," Helen said softly, "and how far you've come." Brenda hugged Helen tightly, overcome with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she whispered. Helen pulled back, cupping Brenda's face in her hands. "You had it in you all along, my dear. I just helped you find the courage to let it out." As they stood there, looking out over the city that had become the backdrop to Brenda's transformation, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. She had found her true self, her voice, and her calling. And now she was ready to help others do the same. That night, as Brenda lay in bed, she reflected on the twists and turns her life had taken. From Brandon, the shy man who hid his true self, to Brenda, the confident woman who was changing lives. She thought of all the people she had met along the way, the elderly couple moved to tears by her singing, the young trans woman at the support group, the mother at the conference finding hope for her daughter. Each of these encounters had shaped her, had reinforced her belief in the importance of living authentically. And now, with her new venture, she had the opportunity to create ripples of change that would extend far beyond her personal circle. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.